Hi, this is Stephen Wilson, and you're listening to Metalwani. Enjoy.
Stephen, welcome to Metalwani. It's a pleasure to have you here. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Very well. Thank you for having me.
Right. Okay. So let's get down to it. You have just released Four and a Half, your new solo album, and
Yes.
you are just done with your European tour. So could you tell us a bit about your experience of playing your setlist consisting of your Hand Cannot Erase album and also a few songs from Four and a Half and from Porcupine Tree?
Yeah, I mean it's a very what shall we say? It's a very intense show. I mean, it's about 3 hours of music,
Right.
and obviously the first half of the show itself is a very intense trip. The Hand Cannot Erase album is quite an intense, emotional piece to play. And then the second half, is kind of completely new music, and some of it is very old music, going back into to the mid-90s for me.
Right.
So it's almost like a kind of journey through my whole career, for me and for the fans. Some of my fans have been with me for many years, and some of them are completely new to my music, have only discovered me with Hand Cannot Erase. So it's a real mixture, of new and old, both in terms of the music and the fans. There are both new and old fans in the audience.
Right.
But it's been wonderful. One of the things that I think is interesting about my older songs is, not all of them, but a lot of them, how kind of relevant they seem to the kind of subject and the kind of themes that I'm writing about now. A song like Don't Hate Me, for example, which I wrote in 1998,
Right.
it is about, the loneliness of living in a big city. And that is, of course, exactly what Hand Cannot Erase is about. So it's been interesting to see how many of these kind of themes are things I've obviously been thinking about for many, many years now.
Right, and you have a North American tour coming up.
Yes.
So tell us something about the kind of audience you expect from a North American city. Will they be different from a European crowd? Or, just give us your opinion on how they might relate to your music.
You know what? It's very different depending on the country. And I've asked myself over the years why. Why, for example, we played in Russia last week, and the audience was almost all young people, and I would say 50% of the audience were girls and women. Now, when we go and play somewhere like Germany or United States, the audience tends to be older and predominantly male. And I ask myself why that should be, and I'm not sure I have a good answer, except that I wonder if it's something to do with the amount of exposure that my music gets in a particular country. For example, I think if you're a musician and your music is very much invisible in the mainstream, as my music is in the United States. You won't hear me on the radio, you won't see me on the TV,
Okay.
you won't read about me in the major newspapers. I think when your music is very much underground like that, it tends to be the more obsessive and nerdy guys like myself, for example, that tend to find that music, because it's not easy to find that music. So it tends to be a slightly older and slightly more nerdy kind of guy that will discover that music. And so consequently, I think the audience reflects that. And in places like Russia, where obviously my music is getting played on the radio and I am getting written about, or South America, for example, the audience is much more eclectic, much younger, much more of an even division between male and female. And I think that is down to the fact that the music is getting a much higher profile, and it's not just being discovered by the kind of more obsessive, nerdy guys. And so the answer to your question is, I think in the USA it's going to be more of a kind of musical musical nerds, which is fine, because I'm one of those people myself.
Okay.
But it's always nice to see the more eclectic audiences. Of course it is, more diverse.
Right. And talking about your North American tour, you're playing in a few prominent cities like New York, Chicago, etc. And I have also noticed that you incorporate the theme of isolation and loneliness in the city in your music very often. So, do these things automatically connect that, you're playing in a prominent city like New York and your music deals with isolation in the city? Would you connect the two?
Well, not really, because, to me, when I go to places like New York or Moscow or wherever, I'm very much a tourist. I think most of my, if you think about an album like A Hand Cannot Erase or a song like Don't Hate Me, in my mind, that city is London.
Okay.
I spent 20 years living in London. I don't live there anymore, but I was born very close to London. I spent 20 years of my adulthood living in London. So I think when I'm writing about a city, in the back of my mind is always London. It is my hometown. It's the city I know better than any other city in the world. And it's a city with problems. And like many overpopulated cities, there is a lot of loneliness, a lot of isolation, and a lot of people that, despite the fact they're living amongst millions of other people, feel very lonely. And, I speak from some experience with that. There were certainly times when I felt that myself when I was living in London. So I think the answer to your question is not really. I think all of these songs for me are really about London in my own mind. But of course, the beauty of music and rock music is that it can be interpreted by the listener to apply to their own situation.
Right.
And I think the city in the songs could be city, it could be Paris, it could be Mumbai, it could be Moscow, it could be New York. But my own experience, of course, is that it's very much, my hometown of London.
Right, it's pretty interesting what you're saying. So let me just ask you this. How do you connect to your audience when you're playing certain songs which are in a rather random order and, don't necessarily form a narrative with each other? So how does a person in the crowd relate to this?
Well, every song is you're talking about storytelling, of course, which is kind of fundamental to what I do, and the albums are always constructed very much, not all of them, but most of them are constructed to feel like a story. But at the same time, every song is itself a short story.
Okay.
And short stories can stand alone, and short stories can still be just as effective in isolation. So if you hear a song like Routine, for example, or The Raven That Refused to Sing, or Index, which are all very much self-contained stories, I don't think it matters that they're perhaps played or listened to out of context of the album.
Okay.
But of course, I will always encourage people. I mean, I will always encourage the listener to try to listen to the album as a whole, as a continuum. But at the same time, I do like to think, and I do hope, that these songs also stand up as contained short stories, and I think most of them do. Perhaps not all of them, but I think most of them do.
Right. So would you say the same thing for Four and a Half, since it contains tracks from different eras of your career? So would you say it also contains a group of songs put together in the same way?
Well, the thing is, Four and a Half is an example of an album where the songs are not necessarily, thematically related at all, and
Right.
for the reason you mentioned, is they come from several different sources, several different times in my life, even. But even when I have an album where the songs are not necessarily connected, I still work very hard to try to make the album feel like it has a sense of journey to it, and it has a kind of satisfying musical narrative, even if it doesn't have a lyrical narrative. And you know, and by the way, half the songs on Four and a Half are instrumental anyway.
Yes, yes.
So those songs are kind of neutral in the sense that they you know, they don't have words. So therefore, it's all about what the music evokes
Absolutely.
in the listener. So I think I'm still working, even though the songs are not connected, I'm still trying to work the songs into a flow that feels very logical, very satisfying, and you know, does still have that feeling for the listener that they have been taken on some kind of you know, of journey, and a satisfying journey. And I think if I have any skill, I think that's it. You know, I'm not the greatest guitar player, I'm not the greatest singer, I'm not the greatest, you know, whatever. But I think one thing I am really good at is this sense of creating architecture within the context of an album, and making an album feel like a very cinematic and satisfying journey.
Well, that's very well put.